Chapter 18. Kindness comes at a cost. Cato looked up from the campfire, hoping to see any kind of signal from the other team already, even though he knew that to be impossible. Judging from the position of the moon, they left the campsite barely half an hour ago. If he had to guess, he would say that Raven and his team were probably on the verge of entering the basin right about now. He returned his eyes to the dying flames, pensively pondering the merit of his decision to split up the team. Of course, he would much rather be the one to survey the situation within the city walls for himself, but Raven had been hinting at wanting more responsibilities for over a year. Cato couldn't deny his pupil yet another chance to prove himself, just as he was powerless to resist Rain's urge to blossom. He might have been overly protective of the Merylesian siblings from the moment they had entered his service, but it wasn't because he didn't have any faith in them. He simply didn't want to see them hurt. They were his family, and he would do anything to keep them from harm, but at the same time realized that Raven and Rain were individuals who both had their own dreams and ambitions. What they needed was someone to give them support and show them encouragement when they would inevitably take off and soar across the sky, instead of someone who would try to clip their wings at every chance and keep them grounded. He wanted to be there for them in the same way that Grandmaster Aemon and Principal Aaron had been there for him. He knew Raven and Rain were more than ready to take their next step in life. In terms of raw abilities, Raven should already be counted as one of O'Neara's brightest stars. With a bit more experience and polish, Cato was convinced that Raven had a ceiling that far exceeded his own. And Rain had been nothing short of spectacular ever since she discovered her blessing. In just 3 short years, she managed to gain a level of control over her aura that had taken Cato over a decade to achieve. He absently continued tapping his fingers on the frozen soil, a compulsive tic he had inadvertently inherited from Lady Minari, one of his former teachers at the academy. It helped him to rid his mind from distractions and to focus on the task at hand. He was sinking deeply into his thoughts as he was slowly getting lulled into a trance by the hypnotic pulse of the glowing embers. Each time a gust of wind blew past, the embers lit up in a fiery orange before cooling back down to an ashy grey. The smouldering pile appeared to be breathing. Lighter and darker it went, back and forth. He never meant for it to happen as he had been avoiding those thoughts for the past few days, but his unguided mind still managed to sneak off to the dreams he'd been having. The dreams that introduced him to Cain and Neera Everlong. Master Hana had supposedly severed the attachment that clung to him ever since he returned from Aspera, but it still wasn't clear how he carried it with him in the first place. The Grandmaster said that Cain was most likely after his aura, which meant that Cain was already aware of his aura's horrific nature. But if that was the case, then Cain should also realize that his aura was an untamable force of pure darkness that shouldn't be held by anyone at all. He didn't understand how Cain would know of his aura's existence since the Grandmaster had been adamant keeping it a secret from the outside world. It puzzled him even more to think about why Cain would choose to seek contact with him in the form of such cryptic dreams. Suddenly, a hand was placed on his shoulder, sending a violent jolt throughout his body. It abruptly dragged him out of his reverie, and he instinctively reached for the sword on his waist.
"Don't worry, Cap. It's just me."
He turned his head and stared into the eyes that would make the shimmering night sky pale in comparison.
"Maya!"
he said, sounding a lot more startled than the situation called for.
"Lady Maya."
He quickly corrected himself with a more dignified response. One glance at her was enough to remove anything else from his mind.
"What can I do for you?"
"I was wondering if your offer still stands,"
she said with a thin smile.
"It's mighty cold out here tonight,"
she added when she was faced with a bewildered frown. He forced himself to smile back and patted on the ground beside him. He unclasped his cloak to blanket Maya's shoulders with it as she sat down on folded legs. He wanted to keep his arm around her, but made the decision to refrain himself from doing so. Now was not the time for any frivolities.
"I'm sure they will be fine,"
she said, noticing the concern on Cato's face. She leaned in closer and started sharing the cloak with him. Her body heat was mixing in with his own, and once again he was feeling things that he couldn't allow himself to be feeling in his current situation.
"I'm not worried,"
he lied.
"Raven and Rain are more than capable of holding their own."
"Well, I think it is a real testament to your character that you show so much concern for your subordinates.
Of course,
he replied solemnly.
they are family.
She kept her eyes on him for a while with only a peculiar smile on her face and nothing else.
Is it true what they say? That orphans are quick to see everyone that is good to them as their family, but at the same time never truly accept anyone into their hearts?
Cato scoffed.
Whoever said that is in desperate need of a good, warm hug. No. I would rather say that orphans, as opposed to regular people, are simply more willing to give anyone a chance to be welcomed into their family instead.
Well, I just said it, didn't I?
Lady Maya,
He countered with a playful smirk.
are you soliciting for a hug?
A few sudden sneezes from Koba destroyed any form of romance that may have been developing around the dying campfire. It earned him a smack on the head from Cameron, who had been staring at Cato and Maya with great interest.
So,
Maya said after a long moment of silence.
what's their story anyway?
Cato wasn't ready to break the silence just yet. If looks were able to kill, Koba would have been ripped open from throat to scrot. The healer, however, never noticed his scornful glare.
Raven and Rain, you mean?
He finally asked back. Maya nodded.
I'm dying to know. How did two Merylesians end up in the care of an O'Nearan emissary? Not to mention that one of them doesn't even remotely resemble a typical Merylesian.
Cato took a deep breath.
It's a long story.
I reckon we have a few hours to spare.
He looked up at the crescent moon and figured she was probably right. Besides, telling a story might be just what he needed to keep his mind active and sharp.
Raven was about to be executed when I first met him.
He said in a somber voice. From the corner of his eye, he saw Koba and Cameron creeping closer to listen to the story, even though they had already heard it from Rain before. He sighed and tossed a few chunks of pine wood onto the smouldering embers.
Let me start from the beginning. About 6 years ago, I was on my way to the royal court of Vicaris, the capital city of Moralis.
Immediately, Cato's story got interrupted by a laughing Cameron, who was wildly waving his hands around to make a few signs.
What?
Maya exclaimed, swinging her head back and forth between the giant and the captain.
No way!
It is true.
Koba said, stroking his thin goatee.
Our lord could have been the king of Moralis.
Cameron made a few gestures with his hands again. Koba laughed.
Well, no one lives forever. It is rumoured that Queen Rosa has been gravely ill for years. Not even their strongest healer could save her. Some say she's already living on borrowed time.
Cap, why aren't you married to Princess Willow?
Maya asked with a slap on Cato's arm.
I thought my future would be with someone else.
He sounded dejected for a second, but then quickly livened up.
Now, do you want to hear the story of Raven and Rain or what?
Maya, Cameron and Koba stayed quiet, even though they all looked like they had more to say on that matter.
Good.
Cato resumed with a sigh.
Now, as I was saying, I was on my way to the royal court of Vicaris. Queen Rosa and Grandmaster Aemon were brokering a marriage between me and Princess Willow. For your information, I never agreed to it, but I did promise Master I would at least meet with the princess as a sign of respect. By chance, I made a stop in a small town called Ambria. It was just some unremarkable mountain village, a couple of miles east of the capital city. I had been on the road for 5 days and didn't want to meet the royal family smelling of travel. So I went to this inn called Siren Song and planned to freshen up and spend the night there. While I was having my supper at the next-door tavern, which carried the same name as the inn, I overheard a couple of locals talking about the news of a boy who was to be executed the following day. Apparently, the boy, who they kept referring to as the Darky, had severely maimed Leonid Redmayne, the only son of Ambria's ruler, Lord Wolf. If I'm completely honest with you, I didn't pay too much attention to them at first. Some exotic immigrant lashed out at a local lordling, so the punishment was probably justified, right? But as I continued listening, I came to realise something that caught me by surprise. Most patrons of the tavern seemed livid. They were actually talking about a grave injustice and even defending the actions of the boy. This piqued my interest, so I decided to inquire one of the patrons about the reason for the boy's execution. At first, they didn't feel like sharing Ambrian business with any outsiders at all, but nothing loosens the tongue like a few brews, especially if they came for free. Within 2 rounds, I learned that Leonid Redmayne was known to be a sexual predator in and around Ambria. Different patrons came to tell me that the Lordling had raped over a dozen different girls in the past year alone, and that Lord Wolf willfully neglected the crimes of his beloved son. Just a few days prior to my arrival, Leonid Redmayne had supposedly forced himself on the Darkie's little sister. Everyone in the tavern was unanimous in their opinion. The boy had the right to defend his family's honour.
Cato coughed into his fist and uneasily cleared his throat. He wasn't exactly comfortable telling this piece of information as he felt it wasn't his to tell. He never would have said anything about their painful past if Rain hadn't already done so in the first place. Still, it was an important part of the story if anyone wanted to know how an O'Nearan emissary ended up with 2 foundlings from Moralis.
She was only 13,
he said through gritted teeth and still felt the same anger he had felt 6 years earlier. A gust of wind blew past, fanning the flame of the rekindled campfire. For a moment it seemed that the story had reached an early conclusion, but Cato drew a deep breath and managed to get himself recomposed.
I remember heading to the town square later that evening. I'm not even sure why I went there. I guess a part of me just wanted to see the boy with my own eyes.
He was forced to pause again when he felt that a lump was starting to form in his throat.
They had him chained to the obelisk like some kind of fucking animal. He was badly beaten. His skull was fractured, his eyes were swollen shut, and blood continuously cascaded from his face into a growing puddle of red at his feet. In front of the boy knelt a young girl, scrawny, fair skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. She was quietly sobbing and covered in blood as well. I could tell that she had been there for a long time because most of the blood on her clothes had already turned to a coppery crust. I just stood there, watching them from afar, thinking how much they reminded me of my past family of Night Song Haven.
Maya raised a finger to ask him a question, but Cato quickly shook his head.
Another time, my lady,
he said, and continued telling the story.
All of a sudden, the girl turned her head and stared directly into my eyes without even having to search. It was as if she had already expected to find me there. I will never forget the expression she carried on her face. Honestly, it still mystifies me to this day. It was the face of someone who had lost everything worth living for, but those cerulean blues of hers. She looked at me as if I were there to make everything all right for her again. For less than a second, I even thought to have caught the glimpse of a smile. I didn't know how to react to it. Somehow, I was severely intimidated by her.
He paused and squeezed the bridge of his nose with a sigh.
I'm ashamed to admit this, but I turned my head from her and was about to walk away. What was I even doing there, you know? Trying to satisfy some kind of morbid curiosity? No, this didn't concern me. I had nothing to do with whatever was going on there. But just as I was turning around, the girl climbed to her feet and sprinted toward me at full speed. It was clear to see that she hadn't used her legs in a good while and eventually crashed into my arms. I remember she felt as light as a feather when I helped her back on her feet.
Cato had to interrupt his story again. Tears were starting to well up in his eyes, but he fought against them with all his might.
I helped her back on her feet,
he resumed with a raspy voice.
I wasn't even concerned with her well-being. You want to know what had me worried instead? My clothes. I was checking myself to see if I had gotten blood on my clothes.
He started laughing and buried half his face inside his palms.
I'm a horrible human being,
he mumbled. It stayed quiet for a while around the campfire.
She apologized to me,
he finally managed to continue.
Fucking hell! She apologized to me and said that she would find a way to pay for the damage. My only thought at the time was...
He cut himself short yet again.
You know what? Never mind. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was young, dumb, and nothing but a scum.
He buried his face inside his palms and took a few deep breaths.
I'm sorry, Captain,
Maya said, rubbing a hand on his arm.
I never meant for you to relive any bad memories.
He took her hand and gave it a squeeze.
No, my lady, not bad memories,
he replied with a thin smile.
This was one of the best days of my life. This was the day I gained a brother and sister.
She stared back at him with a strange fascination and nodded.
Do you wish to continue?
One moment,
he said, to allow himself some time to gather his thoughts. It also couldn't be denied that he just wanted to enjoy the touch of her hand a little while longer.
She had bandages around her wrists that were covered in blood. Unlike the blood on her shirt, this blood came from underneath the fabric. It was only then that I realized she was actually the boy's little sister. She dropped on her knees and begged me to help Key back.
Key back?
Maya asked.
That was Raven's name before he came to Onira.
That doesn't sound very Merylesian.
Well, he doesn't look very Merylesian either, does he?
Fair enough,
she said and gestured for him to continue.
I regret to say that I still had no intention of helping her. I had just become Cato Knight, a lord of Onira and representative of Aemon Everlong, only a few months prior. For the sake of my career. Look, I couldn't just pry into the affairs of a foreign nation. Please understand that I have dreamed of becoming someone my entire life. To jeopardize all that I've worked for. I was no more than a boy myself. So, I asked her what made her think I would help her. Do you know what she said to me?
A stream of tears finally rolled down his cheeks, which he quickly wiped away with the back of his hand.
She said, "Because I can tell you are a good person." Those words will haunt me for as long as I live. Me, a good person. Everything I did in life up to that point was done to help myself climb up the social ladder. Hell, I even worked myself into a position where I could have become the king of a nation in due time. But this scrawny, broken little girl looked up to me and never doubted for a second. I could see in the glimmer of her eyes that she had invested all hope for a brighter future in me. Me! I couldn't say no. I couldn't be the one to steal her last ray of light and tell her that the world is a dark and empty place. She saw me as a good person from the moment she met me, and because of a few tiny words, I was willing to become the person she saw me as.
So what did you do to help them?
Maya asked, fully engrossed into the story. He smirked.
Like I said, I had just become a highly ranked lord of a powerful nation. So naturally, I used my authority as a big fish to intimidate the smaller fish. I promised the girl that everything would be all right and went to the Redmayne estate, where I requested an immediate audience with Lord Wolf. The guards at the entrance reacted with apprehension at first, seeing all the blood on my clothes. But when I demanded entry as the Lord of Serenity Hills and the voice of Aemon Everlong, Grand Master of Onira, they quickly rushed off to inform their liege. I had never met Wolf Redmayne before, so I didn't know what to expect. But as soon as he stepped out to the main entrance, he greeted me with his head lowered in submission. He asked how he could serve me on this fine evening. The son of Abyss probably already forgot about the boy he had left chained to the obelisk for 3 days. I properly introduced myself with my full rank and title, just to establish the clear difference between our standing. Then I told him I was on my way to meet with his queen and discuss my betrothal to Willow Whiteshade. I've never seen someone lose colour in the face so quickly. I pointed at my shirt and asked if he knew what he was looking at. He told me it was blood, but said it in such a way as if he already knew there could be no way to answer the question correctly. Then
Cato took a pause and laughed somewhat uncomfortably.
Well, I might have overstepped my boundaries a bit, but I needed him to understand that he had insulted a superior lord. I gave him a slap across the face.
You did not.
Koba blurted out in surprise. He might have heard the story before from Rain, but never in such detail.
Yup.
Cato laughed, still kind of embarrassed about it.
The slap wasn't enough to hurt, I'm sure, but it definitely was loud enough to humiliate him in front of his guards. I told him he was staring at a shirt that was made from the finest Kyoguni silk and given to me as a present by Princess Willow herself. I asked him what message I would send if I entered the royal court with her gift covered in blood. Of course, he had no way of answering the question. I made it a point to forgive him for his insolence, and after insulting his intelligence for a while, I told him that the blood came from the boy at the town square. He went on his knees and lowered his forehead on the ground. He offered me an apology and ensured me that the darky would be executed the next day at noon. I told him to get up just so I could slap his face again, with my backhand against his other cheek this time. I can still see one of the guards coughing into her fist, masking an inadvertent chortle that flew from her mouth. I asked him what the boy had done to deserve such a severe punishment, and he had the nerve to lie to my face. He told me that the darky had murdered his adoptive father when Leonid happened to be in the neighborhood and caught the boy red-handed. He told me that his son, the hero, tried to apprehend the criminal by himself before the guards came. Unfortunately, his son succumbed to the kind of foul trickery that only one of those people could think of and had to pay the ultimate price.
Maya gasped in surprise.
Chuckles killed him?
Cato responded with a raised eyebrow.
Chuckles? Yeah, I guess that does make sense.
He mumbled and took a quick sip of water from his flask.
No, he didn't. But he might as well have.
He withdrew to his thoughts for a moment with a spiteful anger concealed behind his eyes.
I demanded to see the lordling for myself, though in retrospect, I really wish that I didn't. Leonid Redmayne was horribly disfigured and looked more dead than alive. He only had half an ear left. One of his eyes was completely bloodshot and swollen to the size of an egg. His other eye was gone. The entire socket was hollowed out. His face was melted together in a smooth batter of skin. His upper lip was glued to the 2 holes where once his nose had been. I could count the amount of teeth he had left in his mouth on one hand, which, by the way, was something he couldn't do anymore. One of his hands only had a thumb and a middle finger left, while his other arm was rendered a stump at the elbow. His torso was a bubbling mess of blisters as if he had been held against a blazing furnace for a good minute. His legs were bent in the most unnatural angles, and between his twisted zigzags rested a rusty plaque of dried blood.
Good. Monsters like that deserve nothing less.
Maya said coldly, brushing her loosened hair with her fingers. Cato attentively followed a strand of ash-brown hair being tucked away behind her ear. He ignored her remark and only gave her a thin smile.
When I told Lord Wolf that the boy would repay his debt to me for ruining my shirt, and that the boy's life would be for me to decide, I saw a flash of disobedience for the very first time. I didn't want to feed his defiance, so I quickly reminded him of my betrothal to Princess Willow. I kept him salivating when I said that I would be in need of capable advisors in the royal court once I would become king, or royal consort. We never really got into the specifics. Honestly, it's astonishing how quickly he shifted from spite to delight, but I guess it says a lot about Wolf Redmayne's character. Long story short, Keyback was released at my request immediately. We left Moralis and never returned. He and his sister have been with me ever since.
Maya gazed at Cato with the most peculiar smile. Anyone who would have seen her right then and there would say that she was swooning.
You stood up Queen Rosa and Princess Willow?
I did,
he said and sighed.
Which is why diplomatic missions with Moralis are conducted by May Orbitalis nowadays. I'm pretty sure both Wolf Redmayne and the royal family would love nothing more than to see my head on a spike.
He shrugged.
Kindness comes at a cost.
So why is Keyback no longer called Keyback? Where does a name like that even come from?
Koba chimed in, thoughtfully stroking his goatee.
The northern parts of Malachi and Kyogun have people with similar skin complexions, though perhaps not nearly as dark. The name, however, doesn't come from either nation, I'm sure.
Cameron flicked his wrists a few times and pointed upward to the sky.
Further up north?
Maya asked, and turned her sight to the dark mountain range in the distance.
Who knows? Not even he himself remembers his life before Ambria,
Cato said.
But if you're wondering why Keyback is no longer called Keyback, I'm afraid that is entirely my fault. You see, when we arrived in Onira, Keyback was immediately seen and treated as an outsider. Like Koba said, some people in Malachi and Kyogun have similar skin complexions, and with the Great War still all but forgotten, especially in the minds of the older generations, some people were having difficulty trusting him. Even his very foreign-sounding name brought unease in the hearts of many people. So, I made the suggestion to change his name to Raven.
Why Raven?
First of all, it was to show his loyalty to his new capital city, Raven Nest. Second, it followed the Merylesian tradition of naming their children after natural entities. And last but not least, he is almost as dark as a raven. Of course, just by changing his name didn't sway the public perception of him altogether, but at least it showed his intent. One of the masters, however, kept campaigning for his banishment, claiming that someone like him could never be trusted. Even after both Raven and Rain had willingly sworn their fealty to Onira in public, the master was left unsatisfied. It was only when I personally vouched for them with my own life that the master finally relented.
Why?
Why?
He repeated venomously.
I'll tell you why, Lady Maya. Because Cronus Metalung and I are like water and oil.
No.
She said.
From what I understand, you and Master Cronus are more like fire and oil. But that wasn't what I meant. Why did you vouch for Blondie and Chuckles with your own life?
The question silenced him as he had never given it much thought. He looked up to the sky for a moment and brought down his head with a smile attached to his face.
Because somebody mistook me for a good person, and I didn't want to be the one to shatter that illusion.
Maya squeezed her face into a playful grin, as if she were enjoying a joke only she could hear.
What?
Cato asked. He cast a glance at Koba and Cameron, who both pretended to be minding their own business again.
Nothing,
she said, and just continued staring at him with a delightful grin. All of the sudden, they were all triggered to turn their heads to the city in the dark. A bright flash coloured the sky purplish pink for just a split second.
Shit!
Cato hissed as he jumped to his feet, tightly clutching the hilt of his sword. The outburst of aura couldn't have been anything but bad news.
That's Jada! We have to go! Now!